The man drove his vehicle out of the town of Minnesota and towards the mountains. This was an abandoned road. It had been for as long as Louis Dodson had remembered. He had been driving down this path for many years. He had something he was hiding far away from the city, something that only he had the right of knowing. It had all started with a secret agenda orchestrated by his board of directors. It was a simple task. Darn it, send in his man, grab the embryos, ruin InGen, and become the top company of the global lineup. It was his idea to use a Barbasol can of all things to transport them. A clever idea in his mind, and it would have worked too. They would have made millions if Nedry had not bumbled it all up. The memory of that story on the news had never left his mind. Of all people, why send Dennis Nedry to accomplish this? News of his death was broadcasted after the Jurassic Park incident of 1994, but no one knew what his motive towards doing this was. That's the important thing, he thought, that at least kept the world off of Bison's trail. Not that they were on their trail to begin with. This corporation was as easy to find by Congress as nailing jelly to a tree. Being a questionable company with questionable goals, it was not exactly like they could just throw themselves to the public. Bison was a corporation that made itself so successful by feeding off the success of other people's ideas. They would take these proposals and mold them into their designs. Ever since the creation of the first dinosaur by InGen's hand, Bison had been working 24/7 in the hopes of gaining some kind of remuneration in the name of taking these blueprints for their plan. Dodson had every intention of being on board when this operation took place. There was no breath, no bone in his body that did not anticipate the millions, no, billions that his plan would make him in the company. But all that came crashing down when Nedry wrecked it all. It looked as if Bison was about to go down the drain. They were completely lost. But now, amidst the crisis of dinosaur overpopulation, there was a new opportunity. He soon came upon a large gate opening through an electric fence. After passing through the gate, he came upon a large gray building looking like a research headquarters of some sort. Dodson parked his car near the front entrance and walked in through the main door. The sign above it read Bison Observatory. There were several people there dressed in green uniforms minding the lab surrounding the inside of the building. Dodson took notice of this and continued to walk through the building. He stopped next to a man with blonde hair and a uniform that made him look like some sort of officer. Dodson, the man greeted him with a handshake. Good, you're here. Howard, Dodson greeted back. So what's the news today? How's the pack? The gig is showing a lot more aggressiveness today, Howard said as he and Dodson walked along. As for the rest of the team, they've been trying at the bars again. It looks like the Huracan's doing its job. Excellent, Dodson nodded. But then there's the issue of our new boss. Of course, Howard replied. Steingarten's replacement better have some point of interest for us. And a wealthy paycheck to give out, Dodson added. You know who he is? Not a clue, Howard shook his head. Should be good if he's going to live up to good old Bill. Perhaps he will. The sudden voice caught both Howard and Dodson by surprise. They turned to see a man with short black hair and a dark blue suit standing before them. Dodson knew he had seen this man before. There was something about him that rang a bell in his mind. He was certain he had seen him from somewhere, and that's when he remembered. He could remember a news report of John Hammond after the Jurassic Park incident all that time ago. There was a man who backed him up on his claims. This was that man. Henry Wu. Gentlemen, Wu greeted, holding a strange-looking staff in his hand. I've been waiting for you both. Sorry, do we know you? Howard asked. Henry Wu, new CEO of Bison. He politely shook his hand. Dodson imagined that since this man was indirectly a part of his past venture, he would not be too keen on letting things like that go. Weren't you with InGen? Wu questioned with a small chuckle. I was. You might say that things didn't work out. He walked down a flight of stairs, followed by Dodson and Howard. Still, where there is failure, I have found opportunity, gentlemen. From what I have dug up about you people, you have found a new way to amplify dinosaurs. Correct? If by amplify, I mean You mean make them 100 times more aggressive? Howard stuttered. You know, the problem is, we don't have any way of controlling them. As the three of them reached the bottom of the stairs, they found several large cells barricaded with iron-barred gates. One of them looked like it had been ran by something big, with a hole so big that big something could just nearly have pushed its way out. See that? Howard pointed to it. That was made just by one Allosaurus, and doesn't even look that sized. Ever since we found it here, Sim, its properties have proven too momentous to overcome, Dachshund added. They don't attack each other, they only attack what they want to. They act like nothing I've ever seen. That's why we've had to move them to Area 2. Gentlemen, I can see how you may be concerned by all this, Wu said as he leaned on his cane. He observed the bent bars and vicious claw marks of the scene in front of him. His face seemed to show that he was anticipating something like this. A brief smile soon formed on his face as he turned back to Dachshund and Howard. Perfect. Perfect, Dachshund repeated. How is this perfect? Bring me some Hurasim and I'll show you, Wu answered. Later. Bring in the cage, Wu called to some of the bison workers. He watched as they drove a large forklift carrying a large metal cage into view. The forklift in question was not new to him, but the real sight was what was in the cage itself. The creature stood on two legs, 10 feet tall with short clawed arms. The skin was a kind of mossy green, kind of like how you would look to see swamp water. On the head were two V-shaped crests, and on the neck was what looked like expanded patches of skin. The creature made a small hooting sound before circling itself in what looked like a defensive fashion. Its claws raked against the bars briefly as it stared at Howard and Dachshund. Dilophosaurus. Howard could not close his mouth from the sight of the dinosaur before him, but Dachshund showed a lot more concern than surprise. But I thought they were all extinct? Wu questioned. That is precisely what InGen has wanted you to think, gentlemen. They want you to think this species died on the island, but that, my friend, is one of the many things they wish to hide from the public. Wu began to approach the Dilophosaurus as he carried a silver case. He set the case on a stool and opened it, revealing a collection of syringes, each one wielding a strange purple liquid. He pulled one out and stared at the dinosaur, who stared right back with a snarl. And with one swift motion, he pierced the syringe's needle into its neck, squeezing the liquid into its bloodstream. After the needle was pulled from its neck, the Dilophosaurus stayed calm for a few moments, as if nothing had happened. It let out a few hooting sounds. Its reptilian eyes stared at him as he stared back, right before it let out an ear-splitting screech. The veins in the neck began to swell as if they were being strained by weightlifting. The dinosaur swung its head around violently before falling on its side, thrashing around as if it were having a seizure. Strange-looking saliva drained from its gaping mouth as it began to twitch. Dachshund and Howard were greatly disturbed by what they were witnessing. Sure, they did not care in the slightest for these animals, but it sickened them to see such an action from anything. Wu approached them, holding the staff in his hand. Dachshund could make out the oddest part about the staff. The top of it held what looked like some sort of orange crystal with some sort of bug inside, and the whole thing looked as if it were broken into a million pieces and perfectly glued back together. I'll have to ask you two to please get to the higher floor, he asked politely. Howard and Dachshund both complied and began making their way up the metal staircase, Wu staying behind. He held his amber staff close in his fist as he heard the growling and snarling of the seizure-induced Dilophosaurus. He stood next to the cage as if he were waiting for something. But when the two looked back down at the cage, what they saw next really scared them. The dinosaur had gotten back to its feet, but in a new, horrid state of being. Its reptilian eyes had gone completely pale white, like some sort of reverse shark. The fat folds on the neck shot up, revealing them to be large frills, like the famous lizards of Australia. It let out a fierce, lizard-like snarl before snapping its head in one quick motion. The next thing the two bison workers knew, a gooey substance had been splat onto Wu's blue suit. The latter seemed a tad bit irritated at this as he stepped up the stairs, stopping at the first platform. He watched as the dinosaur clamped its jaws around one of the bars. With a strong pull, it bent the bar so far it made a hole big enough for him to squeeze through. It wriggled out of the cage and its feet planted firmly on the ground, staring around with a low, cat-like growl. Wu seemed as if this was all part of his plan before giving an order. "Bring in Z667S." As if on cue, more engine workers backed a large truck into the lower room. One of them hurried to the back of it and began to unlock it, rushing back into the truck as the door swung open. Another creature slowly walked out of it. The Dilophosaurus saw and roared at it, flashing its neck frills defensively, and then charged full throttle at it, but the new animal gave a loud squeal, not even flinching. Then the Dilophosaurus stopped. Wu narrowed his eyes as his hand stuck in his pocket, moving around for an odd reason. The new creature then gave a loud bellow toward the Dilophosaur. The frill-necked dinosaur looked up at it, blinking its white eyes twice as if it were acknowledging it as some sort of form of new species, possibly even its own. Perhaps even an alpha. Finally, it lowered its head in a strange bowing motion. Howard and Dogson could not believe what they were seeing. A venomous dinosaur under the influence of a mind-altering chemical had become like a wild dog to a dog whistle. "This is what our new company stands for, gentlemen," Wu said, walking beside them and authoritatively holding his cane. "We at Aerocol Labs shall achieve the goals that both InGen and Biosin have failed to accomplish. We will bring the world to its knees and create a new future." Soon enough, every scientist in the company had gathered around to hear Wu speak. The man waved his hand to the people around him. "Prepare your assets. The new Alpha waits to meet its pack. And you." He turned to Dodson and took off his blue suit, dirtied by the Dilophosaur's saliva, and then he handed it to her. "Clean my darn